pursuing scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy should itself become the captive of a scientific, technological elite.
We've signed a climate convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets. Were included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document and the Rio Declaration. Let me be clear on one fundamental point. The United States fully intends to be the world's preeminent leader in protecting the global environment.
Coming up, Technocracy News. And I am Patrick Wood, Editor-in-Chief of Technocracy News and Trends. Welcome to the broadcast today. Today is September 3rd, 2019. It starts a brand new month that's going to be pivotal for the economy, for markets, and for other social events around the world. The first article I want to throw out today, I have titled, The Wrenching Chinese-ification of America. This article is written by Roger L. Simon, a co-founder originally of PJ Media. And I wrote to this, America has roughly 12 months to sort out its desired future as either a constitutional republic or a Chinese-style technocracy. Currently, the tipping point is tilted towards technocracy. The article starts out, it says, as brave Hong Kongers protest the totalitarian communist Chinese regime in the streets and at the airport of their city, the mood here in the West, even in the United States, seems to be going in the opposite direction. I'm not referring to the violent so-called anarchists of Antifa, who often turn out to be emotionally disturbed community college instructors behind their Guy Fawkes masks, but to the larger zeitgeist. From big tech to Hollywood, to our media, to our campuses, to the campaign rhetoric of virtually every Democrat candidate, we are moving toward a homogenization of thought and action that is, well, Chinese communist in style and ultimately in content. And I would add to this that the only misobservation in this article is that the Chinese communists are behind this movement in America. It's not communism, it's technocracy. And we've documented that here in these pages of Technocracy News and Trends many times. The article continues, Chairman Mao said, quote, let 100 schools of thought contend, close quote, knowing full well whose would prevail. We're no longer even paying that kind of lip service. Some form of political correctness has dominated our major institutions for years with minimal pushback. Except for the election of Donald Trump, which was considered a horrifying aberration by our elites, how could such a vulgarian rise to such power, no matter that they themselves were equally, if not more, reprehensible, as the Epstein revelations demonstrate? Because Trump policies were often arguably good and sometimes even conventionally so, attacks on him concentrated on his personality. That was especially true because his very persona upended that unifying and totalitarian impulse towards political correctness. So an American cultural revolution, not that distant from the original Chinese one, except so far no dunce caps, has been put in place by those various elites of the academic Hollywood media complex. Actually, it's been in place for a long time, only now it is escalating and approaching a point of no return. Writers and thinkers are ghettoized. Only approved Republican pundits are allowed space, at least for long, in mainstream newspapers or television shows. The arts have become almost entirely off limits to the right. Conservative professors are an endangered species at our universities, if not already extinct. That is why it's no accident that you see Democrat proposals on the 2020 campaign trail that could have been taken from Lenin's playbook. They are just part of this metastasizing zeitgeist. That these ideas have failed over and over is of no consequence. They sound good. Don't look at China or the Soviet Union or Cambodia or Cuba or Venezuela or North Korea or the entire Eastern Bloc when it was communist, not to mention Angola, Mozambique, and Ethiopia, plus many others that all flirted with socialism, communism, uniformly to disastrous ends. Look at Denmark. And please ignore that that extremely homogeneous country has a tiny population, roughly half the size of Los Angeles counties, and that they have been becoming less socialist themselves in their actual policies. We can use the land of Hans Christian Andersen as our model. Actually, he's drifting off into the thought that it isn't really hardcore communism, something else. We know at Technocracy News and Trends that it's technocracy that we're headed for. But nevertheless, the article is very insightful, and America is becoming more like China every day. Even as people resist and say, no, we're not like China. We don't want to be like China. They are. And in the next article, we give a tip of the hat, or should it be a kick of the boot, to Elon Musk again, who was recently in Shanghai for a big industrial event. And Musk took the opportunity to have a debate with Alibaba's founder, Jack Ma. We reported on part of that debate last week, but there's a little bit more to add. I wrote, Elon Musk is the consummate technocrat of our age, whose grandfather headed the entire Technocracy Incorporated movement in Canada during the 1930s and 40s. He now joins other big tech billionaires to declare that, quote, China is the future. And this is exactly what he said. Musk the technocrat. China is the future. It's my headline. And there's not much to say about this. The article states, in short, Tesla CEO Elon Musk commented that China is the future at the 2019 World Artificial Intelligence Conference in Shanghai on Thursday. Speaking with Alibaba Group founder Jack Ma at the 2019 World Artificial Intelligence Conference in Shanghai this week, Tesla CEO and SpaceX founder Elon Musk discussed the openings of Tesla's Shanghai Gigafactory, calling progress in this country mind-blowing. And this is a direct quote now from Musk at that conference. I spent a lot of my time on sustainable energy with Tesla, with, electric cars and solar and batteries and that kind of thing. And I'm really excited to be here in Shanghai for the Shanghai Gigafactory, which is, I think, that Tesla China team has done an amazing job on. It is really mind-blowing. Like, I'm just astounded by how good the job is and how much progress has been made. And I think it's a good story for the world, and to say, look, how much progress you can make in China. This is extremely impressive. Like, my hat is off. You guys rock. So I've never seen anything but so fast in my life before. To be totally frank, I've seen some crazy things. So, I think it's like, I really think China is the future, close quote. You can sense in this paragraph that Elon Musk has trouble expressing himself, using the word like perhaps a little bit too much, like. So indeed, Elon Musk has seen the future as he looks at China, and it's easy to get things done in China because you only have just one or two or three people to shake hands with on a deal, and it's done. You don't have pesky city councils or county commissioners or state legislatures or Congress, nothing like that in China. If the Chinese elite pave the way for something to happen, it's going to happen, and who cares what the people think? Well, as you know, Technocracy from the very beginning has totally rejected the concept of representation by the people, and rather it proposed that all of society, and especially the economy, would simply be ruled by fiat. Those that got appointed to be the technocrat rulers would simply make all the decisions. There would be no accountability. There would be no voting. There would be no recourse if you didn't like what they were doing. They simply would do the job according to, quote-unquote, science. Well, Elon, what can I say? Final article that I want to put our attention to, I headlined, UN Sustainable Development Calls for Deep Transformation. Deep transformation. This is a phrase that's been in use by the United Nations for many years now, and they keep using this phrase over and over to talk about where the world is headed. Deep transformation, they say, is needed. Why doesn't anybody ever consider what deep transformation means, number one, and number two, how far along this path are we? Well, I wrote at the top of this, sustainable development represents the final plundering of the planet by the global elite and the lockdown of technocracy, or sustainable development. The UN has been using the term deep transformation for years, but people have paid no attention to what it implies. This article was originally posted in Science Daily, and it's just one more in a long string of articles over the years that promote sustainable development and the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Climate Agreement, and so on. So this is not new doctrine that's coming out right here, but it continues to be promoted all over the media, all over the world. This is a global movement, not just something that happens in America or in Europe or in Africa or in South America. This is a global movement, sustainable development. Readers of Technocracy News and Trends, as well as my books, Technocracy Rising, The Trojan Horse of Globalization, and my latest book, Technocracy, The Hard Road to World Order, know that sustainable development is an economic system that the United Nations has sworn will replace capitalism and free enterprise when they're done with this deep transformation. This is the goal. Otherwise, it's a very elaborate scam to convince the world that it should give up all of the key resources of the world to management by a global common trust, led or headed perhaps by the United Nations, or at least the global elite representatives of that organization, and the people of the world would be shoved into a system roughly comparable to neo-feudalism. That is, a few would own everything, and everybody else would be subject to them, dealing out certain resources at certain times so that people could survive and live. So this article states the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change call for deep transformation that require complementary actions by governments, civil society, science, and business. Now here you have the crux of the matter. This involves everybody, governments of the world, civil society, that would be people on the street, cities, towns, etc. Science, of course, is always at the center of this because this is a scientific movement, and business. IIASA contributed to a new study outlining 6 major transformations that will be required to achieve these ambitious goals. The UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, focus on time-bound targets for prosperity, people, planet, peace, and partnership, collectively known as the 5 Ps. By adopting the 2030 Agenda with its 17 SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement, the UN member states effectively created a framework for national action and global cooperation on sustainable development, while the Paris Agreement committed signatory countries to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by the middle of the century. SDG 13 on climate change specifically links to the Paris Agreement, noting that the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, quote, is the primary international intergovernmental forum for negotiating the global response to climate change. Despite the interconnectivity and clear aims of these global goals, stakeholders seem to lack a shared understanding of how the 17 SDGs can be operationalized. In other words, how can you actually kick them into action? Building on previous work by The World in 2050, a global research initiative established by IIASA, the authors of the study, published in the journal Nature Sustainability, proposes 6 transformations to organize SDG interventions through a semi-modular action agenda that can be designed by discrete yet interacting parts of government. According to the paper, the proposed framework may be operationalized within the structures of governments while still respecting the strong interdependence across the 17 SDGs. The authors also outline an action agenda for science to provide the knowledge required for designing, implementing, and monitoring the SDG transformations. The 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement have given the world an aspirational narrative and an actionable agenda to achieve a just, safe, and sustainable future for all within planetary boundaries. The 6 transformations provide an integrated and holistic framework for action that reduces the complexity, yet encompasses the 17 SDGs, their 169 targets, and the Paris Agreement. They provide a new approach to shift from incremental to transformational change, to identify synergies using sustainable development pathways, formulate actionable roadmaps, and focus on interrelationships to uncover multiple benefits and synergies, explains the study co-author, executive director of the World in 2050 Research Initiative at IIASA. In their paper, the researchers considered which key interventions would be necessary to achieve the SDG outcomes and how their implementation might be organized into a limited set of 6 transformations, namely education, gender, and inequality, health, well-being, and demography, energy decarbonization and sustainable industry, sustainable food, land, water, and ocean, sustainable cities and communities, and digital revolution for sustainable development. To simplify the discussion of interlinkages between interventions and SDGs, the authors further identified immediate outputs generated by combinations of interventions, which in turn contribute to the achievement of each SDG. Each SDG transformation describes a major change in societal structure. I'll say that again. Each SDG transformation describes a major change in societal structure, that is economic, political, technological, and social, to achieve long-term sustainable development while also contributing to multiple SDGs. Excluding any of them would make it virtually impossible to achieve the SDGs. Now, I realize this has been a lot of mumbo-jumbo and doublespeak so far in this article. The next paragraph, I'm only going to read you one sentence, gets down to the bottom line, this business of deep transformation. It states, pursuing the 6 transformations will require deep, deliberate, long-term structural changes in resource use, infrastructure, institutions, technologies, and social relations, which have to happen in a relatively short time window. This is the bum's rush that the United Nations is giving the world. It's saying openly, straight up and outright, that it intends to completely transform these areas. When we talk about resource use, that's everything that you consume in your life, whether things you buy at the store, the food you eat, how you spend your leisure time, everything that requires use of resources is going to be transformed. Infrastructure, that includes not only electronic infrastructure, but it also includes all of the physical infrastructure of the world. Institution speaks of all of the governmental bodies in the world. Those are going to be completely transformed into a model, I might add, that looks much like China. Authoritarian at the top, but scientific dictatorship at the bottom. And the next word, technologies, points to that. And then it talks about social relations. This is the interaction that people have with each other, as well as how society moves forward as a whole. So social relations, for instance, have been changed in China thanks to ubiquitous surveillance, constant surveillance with artificial intelligence to identify people anywhere in the country. Social relations has to do with behavioral modification according to the social credit scoring system that China has implemented. Social relations are targeted for deep transformation. In other words, the mechanism that's set up to control society will tell society how to move forward, and it will. And at this point, thanks to the deep transformation of infrastructure, institution, and technologies, the social system has little means to protest or to regress. Rather, it merely reacts to these other stimuli, and change will take place. Lastly, they point out, again, that it has to happen in a relatively short time window. This is exactly what Christiana Figueres said a few years ago when she was head of the Climate Change Initiative at the United Nations. She said that capitalism and free enterprise were going to be completely replaced within a definitive time frame. They have a time frame, and they're working on it. The article continues to say previous societal transformations, like industrialization in 19th century Europe, were initiated by technological changes like the steam engine and were largely undirected, while 20th century technologies like semiconductors, the internet, and global positioning systems were promoted through directed innovation to meet military aims. The authors emphasize that it is crucial that SDG transformations are formally directed in order to meet our time-bound quantitative targets such as net zero carbon emissions by mid-century. So here we see the plan again clearly laid out in front of us. This business of deep transformation is not just a game of 52 card pickup where you throw the whole deck of cards up in the air and they simply come down in random fashion. No, this is a directed deep transformation that intends to change every conceivable facet of life on planet Earth. There's nothing outside of resource use, infrastructure, institutions, technologies, and social relations. That's all there is. That's everything. And these people want to change it. Now, they want to change it into sustainable development. That's an economic system, a resource-based economic system, modeled after technocracy from the 1930s, where everything is controlled from the top down, all production and all consumption. And the UN is very clear about this. So we have to ask ourselves the question, do we want to move forward into this quasi-utopian system that they promise? Of course, they can't deliver on it, but they promise it. Do we want to move into this system where everything in life is managed by somebody else? I say no. I think people around the world have already reacted against this. Generally speaking, the resistance has been known as the populist movement. We've seen the election of populist presidents and prime ministers in various countries in the world, including in America, in Brazil, in some countries in Europe, in Great Britain right now with the Brexit movement. And this is a resistance against this deep transformation. But by and large, these populist movements have no concept of what technocracy is really trying to do. They don't really understand what this deep transformation is going to be, except that they're concluding they don't think they like it. Well, that's a good thing to start with. But if they don't get it pretty quickly, they're going to be subsumed by the very system that they're pushing back against. Well, I'm Patrick Wood for Technocracy News and Trends. We'll see you next time.